Get ready to expand your sense of wonder with the Cinefantastique podcast coming up next.
So, the first thing we need is a map to figure out where all the exits are. Second thing we need is something to start a fire with, as a distraction for when we escape. Plus, the fire should disable all the checkpoints. And the third thing is a knife, in case we run into any trouble. The cook. We can do it. Okay? And the last thing's a key.
Blue wears a key around his neck.
What door does it open?
It's for all of them, I think. It's a master key. I'm in. So am I.
Me too.
All right. But I'm only doing this because you guys get caught without me, okay? And if it gets too hairy, if I say it's over, we stop.
Okay. Okay.
A determined girl named Sweet Pea, played by Emily Browning, lays out the path to escape for her dream team of fellow inmates Abby Cornish, Jenna Malone, Vanessa Hudgens, and Jamie Chung in the frenetic fantasy adventure Sucker Punch. The film we'll be talking about on this week's episode of the Cinefantastique Spotlight, the audio review of science fiction, fantasy, and horror film. I'm Dan Persons, and joining me is CFQ editor Steve Bedrowski. Hey, Steve.
Hello.
How's it going over there?
Great.
How's your breakfast?
Fine.
Okay, that's good. You just finished a bowl of crunchy cereal, did you not?
Yes, I did.
Okay.
Honeycombs.
Oh, I love honeycombs. I like Cap'n Crunch more, but they're retiring the Cap'n, from what I understand.
Oh.
Or at least demoting him, actually, is more the point. So
Was he going to be Lieutenant Colonel
I
Crunch?
guess, yeah. Lieutenant Colonel Crunch. Could be. In any case, let's get back to Sucker Punch here. Let's see if we can whittle down the premise to something coherent. The girls are imprisoned in a kind of nightclub / whorehouse / boarding school / dancing academy / mental institution, and have 4 days to execute their escape before the arrival of the quote-unquote high roller, a much feared client of the aforementioned nightclub / whorehouse / etc., etc. The plan they come up with: they will steal the items needed for freedom by distracting their guards using Sweet Pea's magical skills as a dancer to weave surreal battlegrounds where all the girls engage in sexy, gun-toting, sword-wielding adventures. It's a kind of Scheherazade meets heavy metal in Satan's School for Sluts, kinda. So, in any case, Steve, the story is essentially a setup for those extended, elaborate, and visually dynamic battle sequences. And frankly, you take any frame of those sequences and it'll be beautiful. You take any 5 minutes from those sequences and they'll be stunning. The problem is that you watch the film, and as a whole, the whole is nowhere equal to the sum of its parts. Did you feel that way?
Yeah, absolutely. It's true. I mean, I'd said a couple times before watching the trailer, I felt I was watching a commercial for the album that I would like to buy, but not for the movie I wanted to see. And then the movie turned out to be a sequence of music videos.
Yeah, pretty much it, and music videos. And I sort of want to address the music at some point. But I also wanted to raise this issue. I think this is the first film that Zack Snyder, the director, has done where it's not dependent on some sort of existing source material. Is that not true? I don't think there's like a Sucker Punch graphic novel or anything like that, is there?
No, he's got like a story credit on there.
Right,
So this is
right.
his story, yeah.
And so, I think we have, or I was feeling that I found Zack Snyder's weakness in this, and is that he really has no grip on the story, on storytelling, which is odd for a film that's supposed to be about storytelling in some way, isn't it?
I don't know if he has no grasp on storytelling. I mean, I think he does. It's just, it's a very simple story. It's like, it's laid out. It's very schematic, we need four things, so that's four scenes we got to do. Yeah, we got to do a whole sequence about finding the key and a whole sequence about finding the map and about getting the fire. So, yeah, I think he does have a grasp of story, but it's a kind of video game grasp of story.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, you say it's simplistic, and I think that's the point. Is that in the absence of anything deeper, he just runs desperately to a whole bunch of other source materials. And before we had the recording, you and me and Larry were exchanging emails where we just essentially listed all the influences, if you will, in the various sequences of the film. And unfortunately, Larry couldn't make it for this recording. But you sort of sorted them out in terms of quality and got up a little list of everything. And do you want to run that down?
Oh, sure. The list of influences we saw in Sucker Punch. Yeah, definitely the screenplay looked as though it was written. What?
Hold on a second. Let me just say, before you actually get into the list, that the people listening should get themselves a beverage and a snack, because this is going to take about a half hour. So, okay, go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, it's going to take a while. To me, the script felt as if it was written, to be a series of set pieces, and they just pulled from everything, they liked and or thought would be cool. And I tried to put them, I thought, in order of ascending quality, the things we noticed. So we'll start with Showgirls. Was this you're the one who started this?
Showgirls was one of mine.
Now, what was about it reminded you of Showgirls? I didn't think of that immediately.
Just basically the theatrical, slutty nature of the thing, the sexuality of it, and the show business aspect of it just sort of struck me. And Showgirls is a very stylized fantasy version of that, so that's what struck me there.
Okay, and we have Dragon Slayer.
Mm-hmm.
Which was a pretty literal lift. I can't say it without giving away, one thing in it, but it's not similar. It's the scene from Dragon Slayer,
Yeah, and we all caught that, I think. Yeah.
Heavy Metal. This was one of yours, right?
Right, and that was basically because of, here again, the episodic nature of this. There was at least one sequence in Heavy Metal that referenced World War II technology in a stylized fantasy setting, and here again the rather rococo sexuality within the stock fantasy settings.
Yeah, and I also, of course, the kind of heavy hard rock soundtrack to accompany this stuff. Very much an anachronistic soundtrack. You're not hearing World War II era music while this stuff is happening.
Right.
You're hearing, something that sounds very much 21st century.
Yeah.
Let's see, the Hindenburg.
Mm-hmm.
Again, this is the kind of World War II connection. There is some big dirigibles in it, and they go, down in flames, up in smoke, however you want to put it.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned Inception.
That was for the ambiguity of the fantasy worlds.
Ah,
I
okay.
felt.
And this is kind of, again, this is my list and my approximate ascending order, so some may differ. And
Hmm.
when we talk about influences, you tend to think, oh, it's a ripoff. That means it's worse. And I actually, in a weird way, enjoyed Sucker Punch more than any of those films. So this is at the point of my list where I put Sucker Punch,
Hmm.
and then everything that follows, I think, are better films than Sucker Punch. And the first one, of course, Cabaret, which was one I picked because of the kind of theatrical setting, that kind of Euro trash nightclub setting. I, I'm not quite sure this is the direct proximate inspiration, but it's of that sort. I kept having a feeling that I was seeing something that was probably more influenced by some European films. I was thinking maybe some Visconti movies or something, but Cabaret was the only title I could come up with.
Just,
And also there
just,
was
just,
Cabaret
just
was that cutting back and forth between the events in the cabaret and real life, that kind of parallel stuff was going on.
I would almost want to suggest the Blue Angel, but maybe that isn't as direct an influence.
Right, right.
Yeah.
And of course, Cabinet of Dr. Caligari is in there, but I guess we'll talk about that more in the spoiler section.
Yeah, yeah.
And one I really want to, the one that blew me away, this is a KCRW commercial, and I'd kind of like to talk about that at length later.
Okay.
Have you seen this?
No,
No.
we're
It's at
we're
the
in New
Landmark
York here, dude.
Theaters. It's a commercial for a public radio station, KCRW, trying to make public radio seem cool. And there's this, well, I'll just say it now. I won't save it for later. It's computer animated. It's meant to look like anime, and there's this little female heroic character beating up alien robots. And every time, she's moving really fast, and every time she hits one, the robot explodes in slow motion.
Mm.
And they do that scene intact in the railroad fight with the robots in Sucker Punch.
Oh.
It's not, I mean, it's like they said, hey, let's do that in live action. It's the exact same scene. And I thought, it's kind of cool when you're lifting bits from, famous movies, but I thought, wow, that's really weird. Zack Snyder is going to, the New Art Theater in West LA and seeing this commercial and thinking I'll put that in my movie. So, yeah, definitely a really weird thing for an influence in a major motion picture. Let's see, Kill Bill is one of yours.
Hmm. I would say, amongst other things, the snowstorm, particularly the initial sword fight sequence, and the snow, particularly the snowfall in the courtyard.
Mm-hmm.
That's what struck me, and also her first encounter with the wise man, the Scott Glenn character.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Let's see, Shutter Island and Suddenly Last Summer. These are two that Larry had pointed out,
Hmm.
and I think they refer to stuff we might want to save for spoilers.
Yeah,
And he
possibly.
didn't mention this, but it certainly would tie in, would be One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest.
Huh.
And if you're wondering what the connection between those three films is, it's spelled Lobotomy.
Oh, no fair.
And the opening sequence of the movie seems to lift pretty directly from Janie's Got a Gun, the music video that David Fincher directed for the Aerosmith song.
Hmm.
Except Janie, I think, had better aim than Baby Doll has in this film.
It's been a long time since I saw that music video. Is the shooting style the same?
I don't remember this. I don't remember the style, but it didn't. It was a while back. It didn't have that artificial environment style we have
Yeah.
here. But definitely, it's pretty much a lift of that kind of concept. You mentioned Pan's Labyrinth.
And here again, I mostly be for stuff that we can't talk about until the spoiler section.
And let's see.
But let me just throw in addition to that, and in connection with that, it's also the mutable world of fantasy.
Mm-hmm. And I think we all saw Brazil in this film.
Yeah.
And it really is Brazil. Kind
Yeah.
of all the way through, it's Brazil, and then the ending, it's really, really Brazil, like direct lift.
Yeah, and I want to address that a little more once we get out of the list.
And I think I saw something of a little art house film called Closet Land from 1989, which was kind of a two-person drama with Alan Rickman and Madeline Stowe, and it just kind of dealt with this whole weird idea of you know things in the past influencing the future, and this turning a psychodrama, basing it around something that's happened in a character's past, but playing it out in other terms. So it's set in its own little weird world. Now in that film, it's a very small movie. It doesn't have the effects, but instead of doing a therapy session or something, let's play it out in these weird dramatic terms. It would be too hard to really forge the connections without going deep into spoilers there. But it's just an odd thing, that amongst all these huge, colorful movies, to see that weird little thing showing up in there.
I haven't seen Closet Land myself. I know a little bit about it, so I think I know what you're talking about. So.
And of course, really, I thought the biggest influence I was noticing throughout was Moulin Rouge,
the
Baz
Lord,
Luhrmann
yes.
film. The idea of taking contemporary songs and then putting them in period settings and doing a musical that way. The CGI artificiality of it all struck me. And finally, Wizard of Oz, the invention of let's see the characters in the fantasy world and the real world, and there'll be parallels. It'll be the same actors showing up, that kind of thing.
And you were there, fat night watchman, and you were there, even fatter, more disgusting chef.
Yes, exactly. And there were a few others. You mentioned a couple I haven't seen, so I didn't know where to put them on my list, from best to worst. You'd mentioned Burlesque and Sailor Moon.
Burlesque I just mentioned sort of for its connection to Showgirls. It's sort of, and I haven't seen Burlesque either, but it's sort of a shit-ass remake of Showgirls. And Sailor Moon, because Sailor Moon is about a hot chick in a sailor suit.
Right, and there was very specifically the one sequence in which the Asian chick gets to in that big mecha robot thing and flies around. I said, that's a real, generic kind of anime convention. Yeah. So
I don't think they ever had mecha in Sailor Moon, but it's Sailor Moon is all about the hot chicks in the sailor suits.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely.
And
so I think that was it. I'm sure there are more out there, but those are the ones that flashed most brightly through our minds while we were watching Sucker Punch.
Yeah, I know. And here is the point about that is that I don't know about you, Steve, but I strain really hard not to, and I don't think I succeed all that well, but I try not to, in discussing the films, to compare films to other films. I try to present my own ideas because I feel, it's just sort of too cheap to say, well, this film is like this and this and this. This is usually the way they sell films in Hollywood. This film is going to be Umpty Ump meets Umpty Ump, and that's the way it goes. It's the high concept way of selling that, and I'm try to avoid that. I don't think I do very well. But the thing about this film is that really, Steve, isn't that all there is to talk about here?
Pretty much. Yeah, I mean, like I said, I feel by the time the movie was over, I thought that was the rationale behind it, was how can we come up with an excuse to stitch together all this stuff that we want to do based on our favorite movies. And fortunately, I guess Zack Snyder's favorite movies and some of my favorite movies are the same. So, I'm cool with that,
You know what? The other thing I wanted to mention about this list is that you put Inception just below Sucker Punch here. I would put Inception actually just above it, and here's why. I think that for all its deficiencies, I think Inception's creation of fantasy worlds is more engaging than the fantasy worlds that I'm seeing here. There's just more of an in. You're able to feel those fantasy worlds more than you are in Sucker Punch. And I think that, just sum total, the whole hotel sequence, the hotel corridor sequence, bests anything in Sucker Punch in terms of vision and execution. Do you disagree with that?
I did like the hotel sequence in Inception, but I felt about it pretty much the same way I felt about most of the stuff in Sucker Punch, which is it's there, so what? Or it looks good, so what?
I will say one thing in terms of it looks good and so what. I say there's a lot here that's beautiful. As I say, the individual images are beautiful. The sequences are stunning. Not any of it really sort of stuck with me, except, I would say, for one shot. There is, with the train sequence, there is a long shot where, and here again, all of it is heavily computer enhanced, but this is really heavily in computer enhanced. There's a sequence where they take off in the helicopter, and you've got the helicopter in the foreground, and in the back you have this gigantic Saturn taking up most of the horizon, and in between there, but still very far in the distance, you see the elevated train track with the train traveling across it. And that was the only image really that stuck with me. Was there anything else that you felt was particularly riveting?
Actually, strangely enough, there were several things, but to make sense of it, I have to back up a bit, I think. I think when we see these films, there's a knee-jerk reaction to them, which is that it's great visually, but the story's weak. And if you look at the responses, the critical responses, for instance, on Rotten Tomatoes, you'll see a lot of comments along those lines. It only got a 20% approval rating from critics. So they obviously don't like it. And my feeling is it's not really that great visually. I mean, yeah, it looks pretty, but, the scenes, they're not that effective. They're not that filled with suspense. There's a lot of stuff going on in slow motion. To me, to say something's visually good means not just that, wow, you look at it and think, man, how did they get her to, leap in slow motion over that sword, with the skirt furling out, in that kind of perfect slow motion, gauzy way, but you don't feel any suspense. There's never a moment where you really think, oh, that sword might hit her. She's in danger. There's no ability. There's no sign of, showing a fight scene in which, someone is in danger and then figures out a clever way of how to, defeat a stronger opponent. It's just choreography. And I don't think the choreography is that beautiful that it stands on its own, regardless of whether or not it's, telling a story or creating suspense or anything. So yeah, most of the visuals, to me registered like that. I thought, okay, that's nice, and I could see somebody, with talent putting that to good use. But strangely, around the time the second fantasy excursion, I think, was World War II.
Right.
And they'd done a previous one, I think it was World War I, and we hear Jefferson Airplane's White Rabbit. And that was okay, but in the World War II one, they start playing the Iggy Pop song from the Raw Power album, Search and Destroy, which has a wonderful set of defiant lyrics that suit the story, I'm the world's forgotten boy, the one who searches and destroys. And I thought, and I just liked that song. And backing that imagery with that song was really cool. And oddly, when they started playing it, I thought, well, of course they're playing it. There's Iggy in the movie, but it was really Scott Glenn, who at this point in his life bears a striking resemblance. And they do the Iggy Pop story. That's the man to play it. And And I just started, for the first time, I actually started getting into it and enjoying it as opposed to sitting back and saying, well, gosh, it looks pretty, but who cares? And then they followed that up in the next fantasy sequence with the Beatles song Tomorrow Never Knows, which I probably like even more. And so by the time the film was over, I was having a pretty good time with the movie, but still thinking it was, dumb.
Right.
So several scenes do stick with me now, but I don't think that means it was great filmmaking.
A few things to talk about with, because you make a couple of good points, but I just want to make one side point here, which is, isn't it that Scott Glenn appears to be the only one who seemed to actually be enjoying his time on this film?
Possibly so. I mean, the weird thing about it is it's a very goofy, unrealistic movie, but it has a very somber tone, which I can kind of see maybe why they did it, but it's lacking what should have been the humor or the tongue-in-cheek attitude, considering how overblown and ridiculous the whole thing is. There's no one, not that we all need any more one Arnold Schwarzenegger style one-liners after the bad guy gets blown away, but certainly the movie's not something we can take seriously. It could have used some of that. So yeah, he wasn't sending it up, but I think he was having a good time in it.
Yeah. Well, he just had this attitude of, just roll out of bed and toss this shit off. It's
I mean, that was for some reason, and it's not the most sophisticated writing. I just got a kick out of the screenplay's conceit that every mission he gives to the girl ends with, one last thing.
Yeah,
he says to them, and I started anticipating that and looking forward to it.
That's the thing, and that what we're talking about here is that at the end of every mission, he drops some sort of non sequitur aphorism. They actually have one in the trailer, which is he turns to them and he goes, "If you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything." And I was worried about that because I was going, that doesn't mean anything. So, and it turns out it's a running joke. I unfortunately, I didn't think it was a funny, it should have been a funny running joke. And I think maybe because of just the whole overweening atmosphere of the film, it really doesn't play as cleverly as it could. You bring up a couple of points, one of which was that all of these sequences, none of them are at all effective. And I came out of it feeling that way too and trying to figure out why. And my first couple of thoughts was that, everything here is already from the get-go, it's turned up to 10. And once you start off with that, there is no fucking where to go after that. So you can't build anything. You're already at that level. You're at a plateau. So what the hell else are you going to do? My other feeling is that we're going from one stylized fantasy environment into another stylized fantasy environment, into another, within. And so there's no real out, there's no real grounding that you can get to. But then, I was thinking about, and you mentioned this film, and there's a reason why you mentioned this film, but I was thinking of it this way, is that, there are films like The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, and Brazil, where it's exactly that, yet I was able to get fully into it. And, here's the other thing that I tried to do, is that when we get to these kinds of films, I'm trying to avoid saying, well, it's the CG animation, because I feel it shouldn't be that. That shouldn't be the reason for something. CG is a tool. It depends on whose hands it's in. But I am beginning to wonder if it isn't the fact that this all-encompassing CG animation just and I think I've talked about this before, the extension of the uncanny valley from just the idea that it doesn't work with humans. Maybe it doesn't work when you're creating an entire reality around it. I mean, is it possible that, because that this stuff is not tangible, it doesn't exist, does that prevent you from becoming involved and becoming immersed in in this action?
It can. I mean, it certainly has in the past. I think that's a very common problem. I don't think it's CGI's fault per se, but I think it has a lot to do with it. I feel about CGI the way I used to feel about stop motion. I felt the best Harryhausen stop motion films were the fantasy ones in which you didn't really believe it all anyway, and the slightly unreal quality of the stop motion enhanced that versus a more realistic science fiction kind of movie that's supposed to be taking place in the real world. So I don't theoretically have a problem with using an all CGI environment to portray a fantasy world, but I do think it kind of limits the gee wow amazement factor for some of the action stuff, because it is totally unreal. It's unreal. It's not like a James Bond film like Casino Royale, where they flip some great European car and it sets they set a world record for how many times the thing flipped over, and it's real.
Right. Yeah.
And there's some new Fast and Furious movie coming out where the trailer has a car plowing into the side of a train, and it's not CGI. I'm sure it wasn't full scale. It was probably miniature, but it has a visceral impact you just don't get from this stuff. So I'm fine theoretically that, okay, this is going to be all weirded out fantasy stuff, and that's where we're going with it. But then the action scenes don't pack the punch of, say, a really good Hong Kong martial arts fantasy circa 1992, in which they did it all with wires.
And to bring back in Inception again, there is the train sequence in Inception, which is a short sequence, but it is a more engaged. Here again, it's a visual incongruity. You've got a train going down the middle of a city street for no particular reason, but it is a more believable sequence. And what I've discovered subsequently is because that train was a practical effect. They actually built that thing and ran it down an actual city street to get that sequence. So, I think there is something. And here's the other thing is that, and I don't know whether this theory will hold up or not, but, in general, any medium goes from naturalistic, and as it matures, it goes more towards abstraction. We're talking about music, we're talking about painting, we're talking about photography. And in some ways in film, the abstraction was stop motion, animation, and model work. And I think the thing about CG is that it's trying to go backwards. It's trying to simulate reality more and more. It's trying to simulate tangibility more and more. And maybe because of that, that's why it doesn't work. Do you think that's a possibility?
I don't know if I maybe, but I don't know in the context of Sucker Punch if I'd say it was doing that. I mean, certainly the environments aren't meant to look real here, and the action is definitely 10 steps beyond any kind of reality. So I don't really see that here. To me, the problem is it lacks that kind of. It doesn't have any inertia usually, and they're getting better with it. But it's kind of a fantasy thing of like you're living your life and you're scared of stuff. And what's your fantasy of what you would do when the guys try to beat you up? It's like, well, you jump over the sword and kick their asses and all that. But it's fun to look at. But like I said, there's no sense of real danger, to it. So, yeah.
Yeah.
It reminds me, I think Zack Snyder, he's kind of like the Russell Mulcahy for the new millennium. I was thinking I thought of him because you mentioned this starting at 10 and there's nowhere to go, and you look at Highlander, the first one. It's like by the time they get to the climactic sword battle, there's nothing to do because all the previous fights have been so over the top. There's just nowhere to go with it, and I think that's the same kind of thing here. It's like it's on that plateau from beginning to end. Although I will say I don't think Sucker Punch is at a 10 from beginning to end. If you look at the exposition scenes or the dialogue scenes when she's not into her fantasy fight scenes, that stuff is pretty tedious,
Well, yeah, and I wanted to talk about that as well because it strikes me. And I came out of the theater and I had forgotten that Snyder had done Dawn of the Dead, which was pretty much, unenhanced special effects with people acting. But I came out of the theater and I said, Zack Snyder does not know how to direct actors for shit. Because aren't those straight dramatic sequences, and particularly, the sequence that we played at the soundbite we played at the top of the show here, and particularly Blue, who's supposed to be the owner of this club. When Blue, there's an entire sequence where Blue brings the hammer down. And my God, it's awful.
Well, I'll just say, I thought the guy who played Blue, the actor, was actually very good. My problem was more with, what's her name, that played Baby Doll. Halfway through the film, I was starting to wonder, how long am I going to have to look at that same unchanging expression?
It's true. Emily Browning is the
right, Emily Browning, and I don't know, maybe she's a good actress, but the feeling I got was that's what Zack Snyder wanted, this little pout, pretty blonde chick, whether she's in the fantasy world or dancing or whatever, it's pretty much the same from beginning to end.
Yeah.
And just while we're talking about the drama and that soundbite you played earlier, where they talk about the items they have to find, the map, fire, knife, key.
Yeah.
What you don't get from the soundbite is she's drawing those on a chalkboard. And even as she was drawing them, I thought, I'm going to bet that she's too stupid to erase that stuff. And sure enough, in the other scene you just mentioned, when Blue puts the hammer down, he flips the chalkboard over, and there it is. Their plan for escape, map, fire, knife, key, all right there. And I thought, it's a friggin' chalkboard. The whole point of chalkboards is you can erase them and not leave the evidence behind. So, it just made her seem particularly stupid, but, oh well.
Yeah, I know. And by the way, I don't particularly want to level the blame at the actor who's playing Blue here, who's Oscar Isaac, because I think, you may have seen something that I didn't, but at the very least I can presume that it was the way he was being directed in this.
Right, and I have to say he did a fantastic rendition of Love is the Drug over the closing.
Do you think that was his voice?
I don't know whether it was his voice, but I thought it was, and that whole sequence, the credits kept bothering me because I just wanted to see him sing and all the girls dance, and I really came out of that movie thinking Zack Snyder should never direct another feature film, but he should, be doing music videos. Yeah. I could really dig that.
What was funny here again, when the credits started rolling, I started heading out of the theater with my friend, and then Love is the Drug comes on. My friend goes, ooh, come back, and we watched it, and yeah, it isn't bad for what it is, but
I was trying to figure out why that song and why is it in the credits. I thought, was that a sequence that was going to be in the movie, and then they said, well, we can't use it in the film, but we don't want to throw it away. Let's just put it under the credits, or what was going on with that?
I think it's the live action equivalent of what they've been doing with all the CG animated films over at DreamWorks.
Oh, now. It's got it in with the dance? Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Who knows? Maybe this started out as a purely CG animated film. Maybe that would explain a bit. Before we go into spoilers, though, I just wanted to make one further observation, is that John Hamm has to stop with these types of roles. He's got a brief cameo, but he has been doing that a lot, and it stopped being whatever character it's supposed to be, and oh look, it's John Hamm, and I don't think that does him any favors. So I just wanted to get that in before going into spoilers.
I just have to say that on Amazon.com, if you download the song "Love Is the Drug," they credit it to Carla Gugino and Oscar Isaac.
Aha.
So I do think it's their voices on the audio.
Okay, cool. Carla Gugino, who plays the doctor.
Yeah. Gorski?
Yeah, Gorski, yeah. The doctor.
Oh, you don't know? She doesn't play the doctor. I thought she plays the... the director of the musical?
That's it. Well, she plays the therapist / dance instructor / choreographer / creative genius, I guess. Everybody plays multiple roles in this film.
Yes.
So, are we done talking about stuff that doesn't spoil? Okay, so we shall go into the spoiler section right now, which is the section where we talk about things that you may not want to hear about if you haven't seen Sucker Punch yet. So, if you do want to miss what we're going to talk about now, you don't want to have the film spoiled for you before seeing it, you should fast forward to 57 minutes and 25 seconds. And now we are in the spoiler section. This is your last warning. And I one of the things that I wanted to do, because when we were doing our email exchange, I asked flat out what the hell the title means, and Steve, you came back with an answer. And first off, I want to know whether this is something that you worked out yourself or you read it somewhere.
What the title means? I worked it out myself in the sense of what we used to call vacuum deducting. That was a term we used at USC in film school, when the screenplay doesn't give you the answer, so you make something up without a lot of evidence to go from. In the lack of anything better, I assumed that the sucker punch was the bit they throw at you at the ending.
Okay. Well, let me just throw in. I think we could also call this backward engineering.
Yes.
Okay. So go ahead though. Tell me. Lay it on the listeners.
Oh, the sucker punch of the title.
Yeah. Explain the sucker punch of the title.
Okay, so we've been talking about this film that seems to be set in some kind of cabaret in the 30s. Mm-hmm. Approximately, but there's a prologue set in the 50s, the heyday of the lobotomy, not coincidentally. It's also the sequence that's inspired by Janie Got a Gun, which we mentioned earlier. The baby doll character, apparently mom has recently died, and her stepfather is possibly going to be sexually abusing her younger daughter, so she pulls a gun and tries to shoot him, but kills her sister instead. Bad aim, baby doll. Right away, I was really not on her side or the movie. I thought that was so lame. So she gets somehow put into this institution, obviously not through official channels, some kind of bribes, and the idea is to give her a lobotomy so she won't be able to tell what her stepfather was about to do. And then just when the hammer blow is about to strike and send that ice pick through her above her eye and into her brain, is when we go to what we've been talking about, the cabaret. A different character gets up out of a chair and tells us, it's as if we've been seeing, the film has been showing a play they've been performing. Mm-hmm. Okay, so that's the setup. And now you read that as we're supposed to look at that as if it's just a visual representation.
Yeah, the first few minutes are the prologue. The first few minutes of it is the filmic interpretation of what we see of what's going on the stage. So all of that story is leading up to where she takes off the wig, and we're supposed to presume it's like a Gene Kelly musical, where it starts out on the proscenium and then everything opens up, except this is the reverse. Everything is opened up to begin with, and in the end it winds down to the proscenium. So that's the way I interpreted it.
Okay, I took that transition as she's going into a fantasy as she's about to get the ice pick in her eye.
Mm-hmm.
And then at the end of the movie, Baby Doll helps this other girl, the one who was reluctant to join the escape attempt. Mm-hmm. Basically, Baby Doll kind of sacrifices herself to cause a distraction so this girl can get away. And then, boom, we cut back to the lobotomy scene, and the hammer hits the ice pick, which goes into her brain. And I think that's supposed to be the sucker punch of the title. We're supposed to be shocked that our lead character has just been lobotomized. Mm-hmm. That, there's some explanation in the narration about this wasn't her story all along. It was really the story about the other girl, the one who gets away. So that's the sucker punch, I believe. And I didn't take it as a sucker punch because that's where I thought it was going the whole time.
In extension, that means that the ice pick is literally the sucker punch.
Yes.
So there's that. But, and in coming out of it, my realization was that the entire film was essentially the last 10 minutes of Brazil. And, just as a warning, we're going to spoil Brazil for you if you haven't seen it, but you should have seen it.
Yeah.
At this point.
You have no excuse all these years later.
Really, seriously. And this goes in part into my reaction to the film in general, is that if you're going to be doing Brazil, I mean, my feeling is that if it isn't the greatest film of the 80s, it's one of the greatest films of the 80s. And so if you're going to be leaning so heavily on that film, you had better not do, hey, let's do Brazil, but let's make it a brainless, entertaining Brazil, or brainless, action-oriented Brazil, because that isn't what Brazil is about. And the issue for me with that is that, this film isn't alone in positing the idea of fantasy worlds as being an escape for tortured people. But this is what bothers me about it leaning so heavily on Brazil, is that the theme of Brazil is exactly the opposite of that. Brazil is presenting the argument that the retreat into fantasy is actually more dangerous and more disastrous for a person because it allows us to escape from things that we should be confronting and blinds us to the reality of reality. So the reality of reality, did I just say that? It blinds us to the reality of the things that we should be confronting. So I
blinds us to the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune.
That too. So it is, and for that reason, I mean, the fact that Sucker Punch was pulling this gambit bothered me, I think, a bit more than it would most people, because I have a very, very high estimation of Brazil. I don't know if it bothered you as much that way, Steve. Did it?
No, it didn't bother me. I mean, if anything, I was amused of the thought of what you just said. Yeah, let's take Brazil and use it as an excuse to do a dumb action movie. And I can't hate it for that reason. I just find the idea too goofy to take seriously in a way that would make me hate it. I just think it's kind of funny. Mm-hmm. So again, I'm not trying to say it's a good movie, but I'm just like, oh, hey, Brazil. Yeah. Just add it to the list of things they're throwing at us. And I guess now that we're in spoilers, I can mention Closetland a little bit more articulately. Yeah, that was also that was more specifically about someone who'd been abused as a young girl and escaped into fantasy. But in that case, the movie didn't depict the fantasy. She became an author of children's books, And the fantasy was in her work, her children's books, which I guess I can't remember if we see much of the illustrations or at all, but it's just a similar kind of idea that these terrible things happen and you can't process them in reality, so you transform them into some kind of fantasy. In Sucker Punch's case, they're music videos, and in Closet Land, it was like the books that she wrote. So it was the idea that this terrible stuff is percolating underneath the surface and inspiring these kind of works of art that help you process. Although it's strangely, obviously in Baby Doll's case, the work of art being created is the dance we never saw. And I also enjoyed that conceit, that we never see these dances she's performing.
You see, that bothered me.
Funny. No, because there was no dance she could possibly do that would justify all those awestruck reaction shots. It would be just stupid.
She could have done a couple of it bothered me because it was like Zack Snyder is essentially redefining the word dance. You could have her do a couple of steps. You could have had her do a twirl granted the camera does a twirl around her, so maybe that's the substitute. But it bothered me that they're calling it dance and it's not a fucking dance. No.
Although, since we're listing references, I'm going to really stretch far afield here and say it reminded me of Ingmar Bergman's Hour of the Wolf, because we never see the paintings that the Max von Sydow character creates. We just see the characters staring into the camera lens as if they're looking at the paintings, and we hear them described. So I don't know. I just thought that was funny. It's like, how can I think of a way to squeeze in these big action set pieces I want to do? Oh, that's what will happen when she's dancing.
We'll call them dance.
Yeah. So,
Gene Kelly would be so pissed.
So yeah, I was completely on board with that. I mean, there's a certain point where you just have to embrace the lunacy,
Maybe that.
And it took me, 2/3 of the, at least half the film to do that. And then after that point, I was, I guess I was no longer feeling like I'd wasted my $5 for the matinee show I went to.
I will grant you this. I was trying to get into it and trying to sort of figure out the narrative gambit, and I forget whether it was with World War II / dragon sequence or the train / bomb sequence that I said, oh, it's heavy metal. And that's when at least I synced up with the intent of the film. It didn't really help all that much, but at least it was like, okay, I got the idea.
Right.
Now oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was speaking of we'd mentioned Dragon Slayer, and that's one of those bits that it's not close to Dragon Slayer. I mean, it is Dragon Slayer,
it's
right?
Exact. The sequence in Dragon Slayer. Sequence in Dragon Slayer is the dragon surveying the cracked eggs at the end, and in this case, it's the dead baby. But I think it's I here again, it's been a long time, but I think all the motions and the reaction, basically the way the effect is choreographed, is, I would swear, it's exactly the same.
Yeah, and it's the same botch, because the problem with Dragon Slayer is you don't care that much about the human characters who aren't that well drawn, and you feel sorry for the baby that's killed. It was 2 or 3 babies in Dragon Slayer, just one here. You feel sorry for the baby being killed, and you really feel sorry for Mom when she finds her dead young one there. And I'm, rooting for the mom dragon to take down the airplane. Although why Mom is chasing the airplane when it was the woman on ground who killed her, it's another question. But any excuse to do that aerial dogfight scene.
Yeah, I know.
One more influence.
Go.
How does she kill the dragon?
Oh.
She jumps up into the air and comes down on its head, which is like...
Is that Dragon Slayer or...
Alice in Wonderland.
Alice in Wonderland. Yes, you're right.
Yes, with the Jabberwock.
Yeah.
There's no end to the influences in
Yeah,
this.
I know, and I can't tell you. I would like to figure out how many films they ripped the 3-point landings from, but I couldn't begin that. I just wanted to add in, as long as we're revealing the references. I mean, the point about Pan's Labyrinth was not just about the idea of fantasy and reality, but also the ambiguity of the final ending, and the suggestion that the final ending is the move into fantasy rather than a representation of reality, but providing a sort of bittersweet happy ending to the film rather than ending it where it did. And here again, I'll give Terry Gilliam props for letting Brazil. And remember, there was that whole controversy with I think it's the Love Conquers All edition, which had the happy ending to it. But you give props to Gilliam to letting it end like that. And quite frankly, I mean, Del Toro did that type of ending better than I think it was done here, don't you think?
Yeah, probably so. I mean, I like Pan's Labyrinth. I wasn't quite as blown away as some people were by it. But yeah, I mean, yeah, but to me, taking Sucker Punch on the kind of goofy pop level, I was happy with the ending. I was happy with the bus scene, and Scott Glenn showing up one more time. And if I'm going to sit through 2 hours of crap or whatever, I want somebody to walk away from it. Kind of okay with an okay possibility of something working out. So.
You know what? I was happier that Scott Glenn walked away from it.
Yes. But I mean, taken out of context, it's like one of the few scenes in the movie, that ending, where there's, a legitimate suspense, as opposed to, yeah, there's some cool gunfire going off. It's fairly low key. It's like, yeah, she's trying to get on the bus. She's escaped from a mental institution. There's troopers in the background. Is she going to get on before they stop her? If they do stop her, what can she say? And then, this kind of miraculous little thing happens to help her out of the sticky situation. I thought, that's like a real scene. I mean, it's not just oh yeah, it's cool.
Okay, so are we done with spoilers, you think?
I think so.
Okay, so we shall get ourselves out of the spoiler section then. And welcome back, everyone who has skipped over the spoiler section. Let me suggest that once you do see Sucker Punch, if you do see Sucker Punch, you should come back and listen to the spoiler section, because I think we talked about some things there that will deepen your appreciation, if that's the word you want to use for the film. But let's wrap it up now. And so, Steve, two things. First off, what did we learn from Sucker Punch?
I think two things we learned. One is that your guardian angel can be a bus driver. And the second is that a woman's fantasy of empowerment looks strangely like a 14-year-old boy's fantasy of a sexy music video.
Okay, you know what I learned? I learned a couple of things, too. One is that you can kill any number of steam-powered stormtroopers and still get a PG-13 rating. And also that we've got to revive femme fatales, because obviously there's an entire nation full of desperate 13-year-olds that need us.
Yes, indeed, they do.
Okay, so let's go to the ratings now. Steve, for Sucker Punch, 0 to 4 dots. What do you want to give it?
To my surprise, I'm going to have to give it a 2. It may not really deserve it, but the parts I liked were at the end, so I can kind of feel that the stuff I disliked was somewhat eclipsed.
You know what? I'm sort of in the same camp with you. I'm going to give this 2 dots. Certainly, as I mentioned before, there's some ravishing imagery and some pretty spectacular sequences in this, and the rest of it doesn't hold up. But, I think basically, best idea is to get baked and go see it, Go, whoa. So
I should just I think this is one of those films, and there's been too many of them lately, like Blood, The Last Vampire.
Mm-hmm.
They're better as YouTube clips.
Yeah.
Really, just find the YouTube clips of World War II fight scene or whatever.
Now that you mentioned it, I mean, one of the other thoughts I had coming out of the film was, if this was a TV series, and every week we went into Sweet Pea's fantasy world, that'd be cool. That'd be fine, and that'd work, as a feature film. So, in any case, so that'll be it for the Cinefantastique Spotlight. Let me just say, if you want to write us about anything you've heard in this episode, or want to write us about genre film at all, you can send that email to podcast@cinefantastiqueonline.com. And that'll be it for the show. Steve Bedrowski, thank you for joining us.
You're welcome.
And I'm Dan Persons. Thank you, everyone, for listening. We'll see you next week. This has been a production of Upstart Company NYC. Copyright 2011, Dan Persons. All rights reserved. No unauthorized duplication permitted.